Hello and welcome to the channel where I provide daily content on cricket and sport in general. In today's video I am going to run through who I believe to be the most underrated cricketers of all time. I'll delve into their playing careers, explaining why I believe they are criminally underrated. There are representatives from 4 playing nations in the list, but I would be interested to hear who you think I have missed in the comments. Right, so let's get started. At number 5 we have a player who flew so far under the radar during his career that his retirement passed recently with hardly any fanfare from the cricketing press. That player is no other than Vernon Philander. Vernon played in a team full of stars for the majority of his career, falling into the shadows of players such as Kallis, Steyn and ABD. But if you took him on stats alone, you could argue that he is not just one of the best of his era but of all time. He took 224 wickets at an average of 22.3, which is better than Rabada, Steyn and Pollock from South Africa. It's also better than Murali, Waqar Younis and Wasim Akram. That is not to mention that he rarely opened the bowling, so was often bowling to well-set batsmen with a worn ball. There's one more thing to mention with Vernon, and that's his batting. He scored 8 50s in tests at an average of 24, meaning he was technically an all-arounder. Next on my list is someone whose name I remember memorizing after his breakthrough performance in the early 90s. Number 4 on my underrated cricketers is none other than Shivnarine Chanderpaul. Chanderpaul, like some of the others on my list, played alongside another great, namely Brian Lara. Unlike Lara, who was flowing and destructive, Chanderpaul was an awkward-looking nudger who ground opponents into the dirt. He scored nearly 12,000 runs in Test cricket with 30 hundreds at an almost Lara-matching average of 51.4. In addition to the raw statistics is the fact that he scored the majority of those runs in a weak West Indian team, often having to dig them out of trouble under huge pressure. I just don't think the cricketing world puts enough respect on Chanderpaul's name, so therefore he is part of my list. Coming in at number 3 in my underrated cricketers list is another player from Africa, but not from where you might think. The next player in my list is the criminally underrated Andy Flower from Zimbabwe. I mentioned Chanderpaul playing in a weak team, but nothing compares to Flower playing for Zimbabwe in the 90s. Admittedly, they were stronger than they are now, but he still had to compete against the best teams in the world with only a handful of legitimate Test teammates. Let's look at his statistics, which almost speak for themselves. Andy Flower scored just under 5,000 runs in 63 Test matches at an average of 51.5 with 12 hundreds. One thing which is often forgotten about when talking about Andy Flower is that he was an excellent wicketkeeper also. I would challenge any viewer to find a wicketkeeper with an average over 50 in Test matches, but yet he hardly gets mentioned. That to me is a huge disservice for someone who is undoubtedly one of the best keeper batsmen in the history of the game. At number 2 on my list is a Pakistani who doesn't get the credit he deserves. When you think of Pakistan greats, your mind naturally wanders to Wasim, Waqar, Javed Miandad and Imran Khan. But for me, probably the best player Pakistan have had is the tremendous Younis Khan. Khan scored over 10,000 runs in his 17-year Test career and was still scoring hundreds in his 40th year, retiring with an average of 52. There are a couple of things that stand out to me about Younis Khan's career. Firstly, his longevity was just incredible. He seemed to get better with age, as seen here in his ICC ranking. He was ranked in the top 5 for almost all of his late 30s, which is an incredible achievement. The other factor that sticks out to me about Khan was that he scored his runs in difficult places, always the sign of a great. He averaged 51 in Australia against their world-beating team. If that wasn't impressive enough, he averaged over 70 in India. So for the stats, the longevity and his tough runs, Younis Khan is at number 2 in my all-time underrated list. My most underrated Test player hails from South Africa and his nickname is Biff. No idea? Well, it is the barrel-chested opening batsman Graeme Smith. Again, like so many on the list, Smith was overshadowed by superstars in his team, namely ABD and Kallis from a batting point of view. But I think he could possibly be the best of the three of them. Before you dash for the dislike button, hear me out. There are two factors which historically have made a batsman's job more difficult. Firstly, opening the batting. If you look down the list of the statistical rankings of the greatest batsmen of all time, they almost always batted 3 to 5. Lara, Sachin, Virat, Smith, Bradman, Root, Richards, etc. They all came into bat when the shine was off the ball and the bowlers were a little bit more tired. But not Smith. He opened for nearly his entire career and scored over 9,000 Test runs in the process. The second factor that historically hampers a batsman is being burdened with the captaincy. Well, Smith took on the job at the age of 22 and retired as the most capped captain in history. On the subject of captaincy, this is something else in which Smith excels. South Africa were known as an excellent touring side, and he led them to multiple great historic victories in Australia and England. He tops the list for me from painful memories of him putting England to the sword when touring in 2008. I remember watching, thinking he was the best in the world, and although time has diluted those memories, I still think he is criminally underrated, therefore he tops my list. Thanks for watching, cricket fans. Subscribe for daily content like this.